let's dive right in with a real historical puzzle. For centuries before the arrival of Islam, there was a pretty big Jewish presence in the city we now call Medina. And the historical sources tell us they were waiting for a prophet to arrive right there, in that region. The question is, why? Why there, of all places?
Well, this mystery takes us all the way back to one of the most incredible archaeological finds of the 20th century, and it might just hold the answer to that very question. So picture this. It's 1947, and some shepherds literally stumble upon a cave filled with these ancient clay jars. Inside, scrolls. And not just any scrolls. Carbon dating later confirmed they were over 2,200 years old, making them the oldest copies of the Torah ever found. And buried within these ancient texts were prophecies from Isaiah that seemed to point to something big on the horizon. Now, the key to this prophecy lies in two very specific names, Kedar and Selah. It also talks about a victory over idols, which really helps set the scene for where this might all be taking place. So let's connect the dots here from the Islamic perspective. First, Kedar. His descendants are the Arabs. Then the fight against idols. That was, a central mission of early Islam. And then there's Selah. This isn't just some symbolic name, it's a real mountain. And it's not in Jerusalem or anywhere in Palestine. It's sitting right in the heart of Medina. So for the Jewish tribes reading these prophecies, it seemed like all signs were pointing to a new prophet emerging from Arabia. And that could explain why they settled there, waiting for centuries.
Okay, so now let's shift gears and look at another ancient text. This time, we're in the Psalms of David, which describes a holy site for pilgrimage, a site with some very specific and maybe familiar features.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. We see this incredible linguistic parallel between two totally different scriptures. In Psalm 84, it talks about pilgrims passing through the valley of Baca. Meanwhile, the Qur'an mentions Baca as the site of the very first house of worship built for all of mankind. And guess what? Baca is an ancient name for Mecca. But it's not just the name. The psalm seems to detail three distinct features that perfectly match the location of the Kaaba in Mecca. First, it mentions a dry valley. That's Mecca. Then it talks about springs, which echoes the story of the well of Zamzam. And finally, it describes pilgrims moving from mountain to mountain, which is a perfect description of a core ritual of the Hajj pilgrimage. All right, let's jump from these ancient texts to a prophecy made during the Prophet Muhammad's own lifetime. This one is about a massive war between the world's two superpowers at the time, the mighty Roman and Persian empires.
So to set the scene, by the early 7th century, the Persians were absolutely crushing the Romans. I mean, the Romans had been the reigning superpower for nearly 1,000 years, but now they'd lost Jerusalem, they'd lost Egypt, they were on the brink of total collapse. Everyone, and I mean everyone, thought they were done for.
At this absolute rock-bottom moment, not just for the Romans, but also for the small, persecuted community of Muslims in Mecca, the Qur'an makes this stunning two-part prediction. First, that the Romans would somehow make a comeback, and second, that on the very day of their victory, the believers, the Muslims, would also have a reason to celebrate. And the remarkable thing is how both parts of this prophecy seem to play out in perfect sync. The Roman comeback, which nobody saw coming, kicked off right around the same time the prophet migrated to Medina. And get this, the first major victories for both the Romans and the Muslims happened around the same time in 624 CE. The Muslims were celebrating their own victory at the Battle of Badr, rejoicing just as the verse had foretold. Okay, so we've gone from a public geopolitical miracle to what you could call the ultimate personal miracle, a journey that, according to Islamic tradition, went way beyond the known laws of physics. This journey is known as the Isra and Mi'raj, and it happened during one of the toughest times in the Prophet's life. It started with a journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then an ascent up through 7 heavens, where he met prophets from Adam all the way to Abraham. This whole experience was a massive turning point, and it's where a central pillar of the faith was actually established. So it was during this incredible journey that the divine command for prayer was given. Now, Islamic sources say that initially it was set at 50 prayers a day. But after a series of conversations with some pretty good advice from the prophet Moses, who said it would be way too much for people, the number was eventually reduced to the 5 daily prayers that are fundamental to Islam today. Now, here's a mind-bending part of this story. When the prophet returned from this epic celestial journey, the night in Mecca wasn't even over yet. The whole thing happened in just part of a single night. Now, while that totally transcends our normal experience, it's fascinating to look at it through the lens of modern physics. Einstein's theory of relativity showed us that time isn't absolute. It can actually stretch and shrink. It's a phenomenon called time dilation, and it gives us a modern way to at least contemplate such an extraordinary event.
So, let's see how that incredible journey to the heavens connects to a core ritual right here on Earth, and to a universal principle of motion that you can see everywhere, from the tiniest atoms to the biggest galaxies.
Think about it. When you look at the universe, you see this one, single, unifying principle everywhere. Everything is circling. Electrons orbit a nucleus. Planets orbit a star. Our entire galaxy is orbiting a supermassive black hole. And this motion is mirrored in the spiritual world, where angels are said to circle a celestial house, and right here on Earth, where pilgrims perform the tawaf, circling the Kaaba.
So, when Muslims circle the Kaaba, it's not just some isolated ritual. They are consciously plugging into a universal act of submission, or sajda. They're mirroring the exact same motion that defines every atom and every star in the entire universe. The act itself becomes this physical expression of aligning with the whole cosmic order. It's pretty profound. All right, to wrap things up, we're going to bring a prophecy made 1,400 years ago right into our modern world, connecting the distant past with the skylines we see today.
Now, you really have to try and imagine hearing this back then. The Bedouins of Arabia, the nomadic, barefoot shepherds, were among the poorest people in the region. The idea that they would one day be competing to build tall buildings, it would have sounded absolutely crazy, completely unimaginable.
And yet, here we are. Fast forward to today, and this is exactly what we see. After the discovery of oil completely transformed the Arabian Peninsula, nations led by the descendants of those very same Bedouin tribes are now in this fierce race to build the world's tallest skyscrapers. From the Burj Khalifa in Dubai to the proposed Jeddah Tower in Saudi Arabia, the competition to build lofty buildings is literally playing out before our eyes.
So from ancient scrolls found in a desert cave to the glass and steel towers of modern Arabia, the narrative presented in Islamic sources covers thousands of years. It really leaves us with one last provocative thought. When prophecies seem to line up with history this precisely, it kind of compels you to take a closer look, doesn't it?